Second take. It's 6:26 p.m. on March 20th, 2023. I'm resuming the reading of V.I. Lenin, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, beginning at page 46. The personal union between the banks and industry is supplemented by the personal union between both the governments. Seats on supervisory boards, right titles, are freely offered to persons of title, also to ex-civil servants who are able to do a great deal to facilitate relations with the authorities. Usually, on the supervisory board of a big bank, there is a member of parliament or a Berlin city councilor. The building, so to speak, of the big capitalist monopolies is therefore going on full steam ahead in all natural and supernatural ways. A sort of division of labor is being systematically developed among some hundreds of kings of finance who reign over modern capitalist society. Quote, simultaneous with this widening of the sphere of activity of certain big industrialists, joining the boards of banks, etc., and with the allocation of provincial bank managers to definite industrial regions, there is a growth of specialization among the directors of the big banks. Generally speaking, this specialization is only conceivable when banking is conducted on a large scale, and particularly when it has widespread connections with industry. This division of labor proceeds along two lines. On the one hand, relations with industry as a whole are entrusted to one director as his special function. On the other, each director assumes the supervision of several separate enterprises or of a group of enterprises in the same branch of industry or having similar interests. Capitalism has already reached the stage of organized supervision of the individual enterprises. One specializes in German industry, sometimes even in West German industry alone. The West is the most industrialized part of Germany. Others specialize in relations with foreign states and foreign industry, in information about the personality of the industrialist and others, in stock exchange questions, etc. Besides, each bank director is often assigned a special locality or a special branch of industry. One works chiefly on supervisory boards of electric companies, another chemical brewing or beet sugar plants, a third in a few isolated industrial enterprises, but at the same time works on the supervisory boards of insurance companies. In short, there can be no doubt that the growth in the dimensions and diversity of the big banks' operations is accompanied by an increase in the division of labor among their directors, with the object and result of, so to speak, lifting them somewhat out of pure banking and making them better experts, better judges of the general problems of industry and the special problems of each branch of industry, thus making them more capable of acting within the respective bank's industrial sphere of influence. This system is supplemented by the bank's endeavors to elect to their supervisory boards men who are experts in industrial affairs, such as industrialists, former officials, especially those formerly in the railway service or in mining, etc. End quote. We find the same system only in a slightly different form in French banking. For instance, one of the three biggest French banks, the Crédit Lyonnais, has organized a financial research service, Service des Études Financières, which permanently employs over 50 engineers, statisticians, economists, lawyers, etc. This costs from 600,000 to 700,000 francs annually. The service is then in turn divided into 8 departments. One specializes in collecting information concerning industrial establishments, another studies general statistics, a third with railway and steamship companies, a fourth securities, a fifth financial reports, etc. The result is, on the one hand, the ever-growing merger, or as N.I. Bukharin aptly calls it, coalescence of bank and industrial capital, and on the other hand, the growth of the banks into institutions of a truly universal character. On this question, we think it necessary to quote the exact terms used by Heidels, who has best studied the subject. Quote, an examination of the sum total of industrial relationships reveals the universal character of the financial establishments working on behalf of industry. Unlike other kinds of banks, And contrary to the demand sometimes expressed in literature that banks should specialize in one kind of business or in one branch of industry in order to prevent the ground from slipping from under their feet, the big banks are striving to make their connections with industrial enterprises as varied as possible regarding locality and branch of industry, and are striving to eliminate the unevenness in the distribution of capital among localities and branches of industry resulting from the historical development of individual enterprises. One tendency is to make the connections with industry general. Another tendency is to make them durable and close. In the six big banks, both these tendencies are realized, not in full, but to a considerable extent and to an equal degree. End quote. Quite often, industrial and commercial circles complain of the terrorism of the banks. And it is not surprising that such complaints are heard. The big banks command, as will be seen from the following example. On November 19, 1901, one of the big so-called Berlin D banks, the names of the four biggest banks begin with the letter D, wrote to the board of directors of the German Central Northwest Cement Syndicate in the following terms. Quote, as we learned from the notice you published in a certain newspaper on the 18th inst, we must reckon with the possibility that the next general meeting of your syndicate, to be held on the 30th of this month, may decide on measures which are likely to affect changes in your undertaking which are unacceptable to us. We deeply regret that, for these reasons, we are obliged henceforth to withdraw the credit which had been hitherto allowed you. But if the said next general meeting does not decide upon measures which are unacceptable to us, and if we receive suitable guarantees on this matter for the future, we shall be quite willing to open negotiations with you on the grant of new credit. End quote. As a matter of fact, this is small capital's old complaint about being oppressed by big capital. But in this case, it was a whole syndicate that fell into the category of small capital. The old struggle between small and big capital is being resumed at a new and immeasurably higher stage of development. It stands to reason that the big banks' enterprises worth billions can accelerate technical progress with means that cannot possibly be compared with those of the past. The banks, for example, set up special technical research societies, and, of course, the only friendly industrial enterprises benefit from their work. To this category belong the Electric Railway Research Association, the Central Bureau of Scientific and Technical Research, etc. The directors of the big banks themselves cannot fail to see that new conditions of national economy are being created, but they are powerless in the face of these phenomena. Quote, anyone who has watched in recent years, writes Heidels, the changes of incumbents of directorship and seats on the supervisory boards of the big banks, cannot fail to have noticed that power is gradually passing into the hands of men who consider the active intervention of the big banks in the general development of industry to be necessary and of increasing importance. Between these new men and the old bank directors, disagreements of a business and often of a personal nature are growing on this subject. The issue is whether or not the banks as credit institutions will suffer from this intervention in industry, whether they are sacrificing tired principles and an assured profit to engage in a field of activity which has nothing in common with their role as middlemen in providing credit, and which is leading the banks into a field where they are more than ever before exposed to the blind forces of trade fluctuations. This is the opinion of many of the older bank directors, while most of the young men consider active intervention in industry to be a necessary as great as that which gave rise simultaneously with the big modern industry to the big banks and modern industrial banking. The two parties are agreed only on one point, that there are neither firm principles nor a concrete aim in the new activities of the big banks. End quote. The old capitalism has had its day. The new capitalism represents a transition towards something. It is hopeless, of course, to seek for firm principles and a concrete aim for the purpose of reconciling monopoly with free competition. The admission of the practical men has quite a different ring from the official praises of the charms of organized capitalism sung by its apologists, Schulze, Gavenitz, Leifman, and similar theoreticians. At precisely what period were the new activities of the big banks finally established? Heidels gives us a fairly exact answer to this important question. Quote, The connections between the banks and industrial enterprises with their new content, their new farms, and their new organs, namely the big banks which are organized on both a centralized and a decentralized basis, were scarcely a characteristic economic phenomenon before the 90s. In one sense, indeed, this initial date may be advanced to the year 1897, when the important mergers took place and when, for the first time, the new form of decentralized organization was introduced to suit the industrial policy of the banks. This starting point could perhaps be placed at an even later date, for it was the crisis of 1900 that enormously accelerated and intensified the process of concentration of industry and of banking, consolidated that process, for the first time transformed the connection with industry into the actual monopoly of the big banks, and made this connection much closer and more active. End quote. Thus, the 20th century marks the turning point from the old capitalism to the new, from the domination of capital in general to the domination of finance capital. Concluding this section, the bottom, page 52.